will stand in our way, and our golden age has just begun.
This is Human Events with Jack Posobiec.
Now it's time for everyone to understand what America First truly means.
Welcome to the Second American Revolution.
All right, Jack Posobiec, here we are back at Human Events Daily, Washington, D.C. Today on Real America's Voice. Folks, when President Trump won the biggest election of our lifetimes, he promised that the economy would be popping within months of him taking office. And you know something? He was serious, especially when it comes to gold. Now, in April, gold shattered its all-time high, set 40 years ago when it hit $3,500 per ounce. Silver is now on the rise, too. And with the way things are looking, especially with the uncertainty of war, the sky is the limit. That's precisely why President Trump declared last week that he will not be placing tariffs on gold. It's very simple. There's no stopping the precious metals market. And that's why I partnered with Allegiance Gold. Whether you're a collector looking for the best pricing in the precious metals space, or you're looking to really protect your family's future, it doesn't matter. If it's $5,000 or $5 million, now's the time to act. So just go, it's really simple, go to protectwithposo.com. You can get started. At protectwithposo.com, Allegiance Gold will show you why they have the top ratings in the industry. And I've been partnered with them for years at this point. We put our money where our mouth is. So when you go to protectwithposo.com or give them a call, 844-577-POSO, you can move part of your 401k, IRA, or savings into real physical gold and silver. You may even qualify for up to $5,000, seriously, in free silver. And with the way the market is looking, that free silver could be worth a lot more by the time it actually arrives securely at your doorstep. So give them a call. It's 844-577-POSO, or you can visit, of course, protectwithposo.com. That's 844-577-7676, or visit protectwithposo.com. It's smart, secure, and simple. Call them 844-577-7676. All right, I want to get back into this. A lot of these questions, the security guarantee, Russia's counter now with a security guarantee from the United Nations would bring in our next guest. It's Dan Caldwell, former DOD official in the Trump administration. Dan, how are you?
Thanks for having me on, Jack.
Well, Dan, before we even get into the latest, just, what is your take on all of this? We've seen the incredible visuals. I got to see them with a front row seat there in Anchorage, as well as at the White House for the multilateral meeting. But when it really comes down to the nitty gritty, this is something that I've been saying all weekend. I'll say here again, when we're talking about security guarantees or Article 5, that means that some country has got to roger up and say, we are willing to go to war, to put our country at war with the Russian Federation. And in 3.5 years of this thing, you have not seen any other member, whether it be Europe, the EU, NATO, or otherwise, nobody has been willing to do that. People are willing to send arms, they're willing to send money, they're willing to send their emotional support. But you know what you don't see? Actual boots on the ground. So the question is, when it comes to these security guarantees, is this something that's actually serious or not?
So we've actually been through this before. Earlier this year, when I was in the Trump administration, is that the Europeans tried to get together what at the time they were calling an assurance force. It was a force that would deploy to Ukraine after a ceasefire, because at that time, the focus was on getting a ceasefire and then going to a peace deal. And by the way, I think Trump is right to recognize that trying to get a ceasefire and then a peace deal is not a good idea. And he's right to focus on securing a broader settlement to the conflict. But the Europeans at that time, they were trying to get together 20,000 troops, and they couldn't do it. Some of the biggest armies in Europe, whether it was the Polish, the Germans, the Italians, they outright refused at the beginning to participate, and then it really fell to the British and French. And they could not pull together the troops to do it. And since then, not much has changed, and you're kind of seeing the cycle repeat itself. You've already seen the Germans come out and saying they aren't going to contribute. They're saying, oh, well, we just deployed all these new troops to the Baltics. We can't do it. The Italians have said they aren't going to contribute. The Poles have said they aren't going to contribute. And today, both the French and British poured cold water on them actually contributing in a significant way to a peacekeeping force that would be part of a security guarantee or some type of post-conflict settlement. So the point of me walking through that is this, is that I think, again, President Trump has made significant progress here. But what I'm increasingly worried about is that the Europeans are trying to do a bait and switch on us, is that they're trying to get us to commit to doing certain things and that they won't hold up their end of the bargain and lead us holding the bag in terms of providing these security guarantees by ourselves. So to those who are hopefully watching in the administration of the White House, I would just say that you need to be incredibly careful here that the Europeans don't do what they've been doing really the last 30, 40 years and pass the buck to us again and make us bear the primary burden for solving yet another problem in Europe's backyard.
Well, and that's where it comes down to, because suddenly you hear this stuff about, oh, we're going to provide a coordination and maybe some air cover and air support. And it sounds a lot like a no-fly zone, which gets you into the same situation that that these exact same conversations when they were happening at the time over Syria. Because all of a sudden, if you're in a situation where we've got our combat air patrols up and the Russians have theirs up, guess what? One mishap, one issue that goes wrong, suddenly you're going to find yourselves in a shooting war with Russia. And this is something that even Barack Obama understood is not something the United States wants to get into.
That's 100% correct. And it's important to remember is that if you're going to establish a no-fly zone, that doesn't just entail flying planes over a certain area. And you saw this in the wars in the former Yugoslavia where NATO did a no-fly zone, and then in Iraq where the United States and Britain and then for a while France did no-fly zone. It entails shooting down other aircraft and also bombing air defense sites that could threaten American or NATO aircraft. So that is something that I think will actually probably be a non-starter for the Russians and something that we need to be incredibly cautious about. Now, if air support means the United States helps move troops, assuming the Europeans can get them together, and as I said, that's really looking increasingly unlikely, but if the British or French need help moving troops from one side of the continent to another, and that requires our airlift, okay, fine, that's not that big of a deal. But the minute you start to send assets across that border, or you start to station certain types of capability on the border in Poland or Romania or Slovakia or Hungary, that's when things get really dangerous. And so not only do I think it's a non-starter for the Russians, but if we go ahead with it and focus a lot on it, we could start to get ourselves in a really difficult position.
Well, and so this is kind of where it comes down to, because I just read through some of Sergey Lavrov's comments earlier today, and he mentioned right away, he said no NATO, but he would be open to, and this was so interesting, members of the UN Permanent Security Council contributing to the guarantees. Now, he didn't talk about boots on the ground, but he was talking about guarantees. So one would, I think, at this point, believe that there's a bit of synonymity between this idea of a guarantee as well as a peacekeeping force. But he mentioned something that not only, the UN Security Council, that's the United States, that's France, that's Great Britain. It's also, however, Russia, of course, who is one of Ukraine's neighbors, something he was talking about. And in addition, it's China, the People's Republic of China. So possibly bringing China into all of this. And while I think that obviously changes the calculus, I do think that there's perhaps an interesting opening here for getting some kind of resolution done at the UN level, because this is a rare time where you might actually be able to get the United States, Russia, and China to all agree on a resolution.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting set of remarks from Lavrov, but it's also important to note, and Jack, I know you've talked about this, is that the Russians have always recognized that, going forward, Ukraine's going to need some type of security guarantee, or maybe the more important term is security architecture. And what I mean by that is a collection of countries, both within Europe, possibly just outside of Europe, like Turkey, and possibly even countries as far afield as Saudi Arabia or India, to help guarantee their security going forward. And again, security guarantees doesn't necessarily just mean troops on the ground. It could mean things like that a certain set of countries provide training or certain capabilities to the Ukrainians. They commit to provide a certain amount of arms. And that's actually somewhat of our what our relationship with the Israelis is like. 'Cause we have a memorandum of understanding that we're going to provide them X billion dollars worth of arms. That's why a few years ago you had some people saying, hey, the Israel model as a security guarantee structure would work for Ukraine. Now, it's not a perfect solution. Of course, the Russians would have concerns about us providing certain capabilities. But again, a lot of people have this binary idea of how security guarantees work. It's either like NATO Article 5 or it's nothing. And there's a lot of different things in between that could work here and that ultimately the Russians would agree to. And again, they've admitted since 2022, they of course have their interests. They want some type of veto and say in it, and you understand why. But they have always admitted that some post-conflict resolution is going to involve some type of security guarantee for Ukraine. It's just a matter of what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Dan, we've got a quick break coming up here. I want to hold you over because this is the most important story in the world. It's the top of the news cycle, and we are going to get to the bottom of where all of this is going. And who knows? Perhaps in 2 weeks, we'll be in Moscow. Jack Posobiec, Real America's Voice, Human Events Daily, right back.